Torrential rain had been falling for hours as Mason took the dark mountain road home. He needed to be home by 9 for his daughter's birthday. But when his headlights caught a smoking car down in the ravine, he did not hesitate. He scrambled down into the pitch black, cutting the stranger free, dragging her clear just seconds before the fuel tank erupted. He quietly drove away, seeking no praise. His daughter was waiting, and tomorrow meant work. He had no clue that the stranger he saved was a wealthy executive about to buy his former company. Let's follow his journey, because true kindness never asks for a reward yet often finds one anyway. What happens next completely proves that truth. At 34, Mason carried the heavy weight of 2 lives alone ever since his wife, Dana, passed away from a sudden brain aneurysm 3 years ago. One normal morning, she simply kissed him goodbye, walked little Ella to the bus stop, and by noon she was gone. There were no warnings, no long illness, and absolutely no time for a final goodbye. Just a hospital phone call and a heavy silence that settled forever into their empty home. Mason took only 2 days off from work, and then he returned. Rent does not pause for grief, and his daughter's medicine was not free. He worked as a mechanic and part-time driver for Blake Logistics, a local freight company hauling heavy supplies right across that dangerous mountain pass. The pay was barely enough. The shifts were long, and those trucks were far older than safety reports claimed. But the work was steady. An honest man gifted with engines, he simply stuck around. Every spare dollar from those night routes went straight to his daughter's asthma medicine, her basic school supplies, and a tiny savings account he quietly built, dollar by dollar. He just kept quietly saving anyway. Right on the dashboard of his worn-out pickup truck, he taped a small picture of Ella on her first day of school, smiling wide with missing teeth, wearing a backpack almost as large as she was. You and I know how life tests a person's heart. That night the mountain tested his. The mountain road wound blindly through sharp turns right above a deep, pitch-black ravine, and the relentless downpour had turned the highway into a fast-flowing river. Mason drove carefully, his headlights cutting weak beams through the heavy sheet of rain, the old windshield wipers completely losing their struggle against the massive storm. He was 20 minutes from home when a sudden, terrible sound shattered the night. The sickening smash of metal slamming into a guardrail at high speed, screeching tires losing grip, then plunging completely off the edge of the road. A loud, heavy impact as a vehicle tumbled down the steep embankment into darkness. Mason slammed on the brakes. He was out of his truck before the echo faded. He leaned over the broken rail and saw the wreckage below. A sedan lay flipped upside down, its headlights shining uselessly into the thick mud. Heavy smoke poured from the crushed front end. The car balanced on a narrow ledge 40 feet below the highway, wedged against sharp rocks. Peering through the broken glass, Mason saw a human being trapped in the wreckage. Without needing recognition, he grabbed the emergency kit from behind his seat. Inside the cab lay simple tools, a box cutter, flashlight, and worn gloves, and a frayed tow rope that had practically become part of his old truck. With zero audience, he immediately plunged down the steep slope. The slick, muddy bank was dangerous. He slid down on his boots, grabbing wild brush and jagged rocks to break his fall. Reaching the smashed vehicle, the sharp stench of raw gasoline hit him. That toxic smell meant his window to save a life was closing. Inside lay an unconscious stranger, a woman whose chest was still rising. The crash had locked her seatbelt tight, trapping her at a brutal angle. To get her out, he had to cut the thick strap. He didn't hesitate. He sliced the belt, yanked the door handle, and realized the impact had completely jammed it shut. He slammed his shoulder into the door, applying raw, focused force. The strength of a working man used to solving problems with hard physical labor. The door groaned open. He reached in and wrapped his arms around this total stranger. He pulled her from the wreckage, using the kind of pure strength that leaves a body aching for days. He carried her up the muddy slope, just as the ruptured fuel tank finally exploded behind them. The blast wasn't movie magic. It was sudden, ugly, and deafening. A blistering shockwave tore up the muddy hill, scorching his heavy jacket as burning shrapnel hissed in the cold rain all around them. A jagged piece of hot debris sliced right across his left hand. But he never stopped moving. Up on the asphalt, he laid her down, checked her steady pulse, and quickly dialed 911 on his wet phone. He gave dispatch the coordinates, reporting she was unconscious with a head injury. He confirmed there was no major bleeding and that her breathing was stable. The operator urged him to stay on the line. He waited right there until the distant sirens began echoing up the dark mountain pass from the valley below. Then he wrapped his bleeding hand in a greasy rag, climbed into his beat-up truck and slipped away into the dark. He didn't even leave a name. You see, true kindness never needs to ask who it's saving. It was 9:10 now. His daughter Ella was waiting, while the cheap birthday cake on his passenger seat had taken a beating and now slumped to one side. He steered carefully, resting his throbbing, bandaged hand on his knee. His good hand gripped the wheel, focused only on getting home to his little girl. He lived on the 3rd floor of a worn-out apartment building that had seen far better days. The old elevator had been completely broken for 8 long months, and the landlord had long since stopped answering any maintenance requests. So he quietly walked up the stairs, shielding the battered cake. He found little Ella exactly where he was afraid she would be, fast asleep at the kitchen table. Her head rested on her arms next to a tiny cake she'd bought with her own saved-up allowance. A single candle had burned all the way down to a tiny stub. She was wearing the bright yellow sweater she only saved for special days. She had stayed awake waiting for him as long as possible. He placed his damaged cake next to hers, slumped into the chair opposite her, and just watched his sleeping girl in silence. You and I both know the quiet pain of disappointing someone we love. It was a heavy weight on his shoulders. Gently, he reached out and touched her small shoulder. Ella stirred, slowly lifting her head. She blinked at him with that slow, trusting innocence of a child waking up. Seeing her tired, selfless father, she smiled. Then she spotted his hand wrapped in a greasy rag. Instantly, her eyes sharpened, a heartbreaking alertness kids only develop when they worry too much about a parent. She quietly asked him what had happened. He explained he stopped in the dark, risking his life for a stranger in a burning car. Ella just stared at him, understanding. She didn't cry or complain, never even asking if her birthday cake was ruined. Instead, she climbed down, walked around the table, and wrapped her small arms around his neck. She whispered that Mom would be so proud of him. Mason held his little girl tight, staying silent, knowing no words could ever improve on a truth like that. Together they lit both candles, her tiny stub plus a single wax stick from a kitchen drawer. And they sang Happy Birthday right there, using those gentle, hushed voices meant to keep from waking the neighbors. Then they ate cheap cake at almost 10 on a school night. Unconditional love shows in these quiet moments. For Mason, this imperfect night was the most beautiful birthday he could remember. He tucked Ella into bed at 10:30, double-checking she used her evening asthma inhaler. He was washing his burned hand at the sink when his cell phone suddenly buzzed. A text from his boss, Jackson Blake Direct, no greeting. Written by a man who never filtered his arrogance. Be at the office at 7 a.m. sharp. We need to talk. Mason read it twice, his stomach sinking with the cold dread only a struggling single father feels when employment is threatened. He crawled into bed, fully aware sleep was not happening tonight. Let us look closely here. Blake Logistics sat in a grim flat building near the freight yards. The exact kind of place that screamed one clear fact about its owner. Ruthless efficiency mattered, while human compassion absolutely did not. Mason arrived there at 6:55. His injured hand wore a fresh bandage, his heavy jacket hiding his silent, heroic burns. He spotted his direct manager, a nervous guy named Dennis, pacing anxiously in the hallway right outside the main glass. Office door. Dennis wore a fake neutral expression that completely failed. Dennis quietly muttered that Blake was waiting inside the big conference room. Mason asked why. Dennis just looked away, whispering he thought Mason already knew. Jackson Blake was 51. He built this entire shipping outfit from a measly 2-truck fleet into a 20-vehicle business using a toxic mix of real industry smarts and a ruthless management style that treated good employees as mere expenses to chop. The boss was not stupid. He was something much more revealing. A man who learned early on that the easiest path to profit always points morally downward. He treated safety protocols like cheap bargaining chips. And anyone mentioning dangerous conditions was not a warning to heed, but an enemy to crush. Over 2 years, he had publicly fired 3 mechanics just for reporting broken fleet trucks. So when Mason handed in a formal written grievance 8 months ago listing bad brakes and quoting safety laws, you and I know true kindness eventually meets its reward. Because Mason's true, kind character meant he quietly learned the exact rules. Jackson kept a formal complaint waiting in a drawer. He saw Mason as a minor nuisance waiting for the right moment to strike. Today you and I see that exact moment arrive. Jackson stood proud at the conference table, keeping Dennis right by his side. 3 other shift managers sat there as quiet witnesses. He detailed the case against Mason with the cold, practiced rhythm of an executioner. The formal charge was actually very simple. Mason had supposedly abandoned his delivery route last night, leaving cargo untouched, while clocking in an hour late for his mandatory shift today. Jackson hid the fact that this schedule shift was texted to Mason at 11 last night. He completely dismissed Mason's desperate excuse about saving a stranger, a trapped, nameless driver, and the terrifying explosion on that dark highway. He listened with the cold expression of a boss who had already decided it was a lie. When Mason finished speaking, Jackson calmly pointed out the lack of any proof. No police report, no witnesses, adding that in his experience, employees who skipped shifts always made up wild stories. Mason stayed remarkably calm, insisting the local paramedics had a record. He begged them to check the highway traffic camera footage. Jackson claimed that wasn't his concern, bringing up Mason's history of insubordination. That heavy word hung in the silence, making an unjust firing feel entirely legitimate. Mason scanned the table, finding absolutely no allies in that room. Dennis just kept staring at his notes. The other managers stared at the wall, too afraid to defend a good man. Jackson coldly announced that Mason was officially fired, effective immediately. His final paycheck would be frozen to cover fake damages from that undelivered cargo, and building security would march him straight out the door. Before Mason could even react, Jackson twisted the knife deeper. He spoke in the disgustingly casual tone of a boss showing off his power through pure cruelty, saying what a tragedy it was that a single father failed at basic duties, that someone in Mason's tough financial spot should not make reckless choices. And he hoped little Ella understood why their rent check was going to bounce. Mason took in that vicious threat, and something inside him went totally silent. The kind of deep silence right before a man's spirit breaks or turns to steel. He stayed completely silent. He never even raised his voice. He refused to give his cruel boss the pleasure of seeing him break. He calmly stood up, grabbing the small paper bag of locker belongings Dennis had silently fetched. He gave the room one brief nod, then walked out. The security guard, a kind kid named Kevin, who often had lunch with Mason, escorted him out, keeping his guilty eyes glued to the floor. Mason gently told him not to worry. They walked through the main lobby, the heavy glass doors locking behind them. Look at him, a burned hand, 0 paycheck, all for saving a nameless stranger. His mind raced to the expensive medicine little Ella needed by the end of the month. But 40 miles away, resting in a private room at Ridgeline Medical Center, true kindness doesn't care who is watching. A woman woke up, slowly piecing reality together. Her name was Evelyn Grant, and she immediately realized she was in a hospital. The sharp, localized throbbing made it instantly obvious. Broken ribs and a crushing headache pointed to a devastating crash on the highway. With her usual sharp, analytical mind, she realized something else. She was incredibly lucky. Left alone, she would have perished in the dark. A doctor entered the room, confirming she had suffered a mild concussion, along with 3 fractured ribs and severe bruising all over her body. She listened, asked about her recovery, then asked who had dragged her from the wreckage. But the doctor had very little information to give her. A stranger called for help, staying nearby in the dark until help arrived. Then he disappeared, no name, no desire for reward, just pure, anonymous decency. By the time emergency crews arrived, the vehicle was entirely consumed by fire. Her mystery rescuer had only seconds to pull off the daring escape. To free her, he had sliced her jammed seatbelt with a knife. That was the entire story. The mountain pass had cameras, and authorities likely had license records, but no one had checked yet. Evelyn's trusted assistant, Charlotte Reed, her closest corporate ally, arrived at the hospital within the hour. Charlotte was incredibly loyal and highly capable. She focused on getting real results rather than putting on a show for others. Evelyn shared the details of the crash and gave one command: track down her nameless savior. It took Charlotte just 2 hours. A local pickup truck license led directly to a man named Mason Carter. He was 34, living in a small valley town beneath that dangerous highway. A struggling single father making ends meet as a mechanic and driver. And according to his latest work history, which Charlotte quietly obtained from a contact with System Access, he had been fired that very morning from Blake Logistics, accused of job abandonment and insubordination. Charlotte quietly handed the digital file over to Evelyn. Evelyn read the screen with total calm, absorbing the heavy news before making her next move. Then she studied it once more. Now let's look closer. She saw Mason had previously filed a major safety complaint 8 months ago, exposing severe hazards within the transport company. A warning that management had completely swept under the rug. And 3 other drivers had also been let go for reporting the exact same issues. She immediately recalled the safety file she was reviewing just before her accident. The thick folder on Blake Logistics sitting in her car when it flipped. Her team had spent weeks researching the company for a potential acquisition. And that folder contained a deeply troubling list of violations involving neglected trucks and the mistreatment of their staff. She pictured this young father sliding down a muddy ravine to save a complete stranger, cutting her seatbelt while gasoline leaked all over the wreck. He lost his job for it, but true, selfless kindness has a way of returning. Karma moves fast. Evelyn Grant did not build her empire by ignoring quiet heroes. To honor a nameless savior, she immediately summoned her entire legal team. You and I know that buying out a heartless company takes very little effort. The business drowned in debt, cash flow shook, and selfish Jackson Blake. He never expected an anonymous force to strike with such overwhelming, rapid wealth. He made foolish mistakes during negotiations that any careful, compassionate leader focused on more than profit would easily avoid. He blindly signed papers giving Evelyn total control within 48 hours. He only knew some regional firm wanted to expand its routes along the highway corridor, but the true identity of his quiet judge remained completely hidden. He signed the contracts with the smug arrogance of a selfish man, convinced that luck always favors the ruthless. He went home that night celebrating his own blind greed. A mandatory company meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. Jackson arrived wearing a sharp blazer, fully expecting to bargain with his new bosses, to protect his own high-ranking executive role in the business. Instead, he found a packed room and a quiet stranger standing at the head of the table. She possessed the absolute calmness of someone defending a selfless hero, knowing precisely how the upcoming battle is going to end. She announced her name clearly as Evelyn Grant, president of Grant Holdings, and now the sole owner of Blake Logistics. She spoke softly, sharing a simple truth that the entire room had to accept. Jackson collapsed into his chair. The room went dead silent. Evelyn declared she had one vital duty to fulfill before discussing any business. She demanded to see the firing file of driver Mason Carter. Jackson's face flashed with brief panic before he forced a calm mask. He insisted that Mason Carter was a terrible, unreliable employee, and letting him go was just normal procedure after poor performance. Evelyn stared at him with cold intensity, quietly demanding to see the written files. Someone slid the folder over, and she reviewed it while the room held its breath. Then she flipped open her laptop. Let's examine the truth together. She turned the screen, revealing 90 seconds of footage from a dark mountain highway. The grainy video captured it. A worn truck pulled onto the dark shoulder at 10:47 p.m. It showed a brave shadow leaping selflessly over the guardrail. Minutes later, the nameless hero dragged a helpless stranger up the steep bank. It filmed the car exploding, then showed the truck leaving at 11:03. She opened an emergency call from 11:01. A voice sounding just like Mason reported the injured stranger's location and critical condition. Next, she showed tracking data from Mason's official delivery device. It proved his last delivery was completed at 10:31. The map proved a pure heart paused his grueling shift on a dark pass to rescue an unknown soul. Panicking, Jackson claimed Mason set up this entire presentation with Evelyn beforehand. He argued that the timeline seemed incredibly suspicious. He claimed anyone would doubt why a billionaire would swoop in to protect a nameless driver. He bluffed hard, but you and I know his fate was already sealed. Quite a few in that room squirmed. We both know that look, people realizing their corrupt boss is finally sinking. Quietly by the wall, Charlotte Reed opened another folder. Inside were printed emails revealing what Jackson did in the dark, ordering the maintenance crew to skip crucial brake checks on trucks long past their legal deadlines. The file contained 3 bills for phantom maintenance on vehicles that were never actually repaired, and a hidden incident report from 14 months ago, bravely submitted by Roy Tanner, detailing a horrific brake failure on Route 11 that caused massive property damage. A report quietly buried in the dark with no real investigation or warning to state officials. Despite being strictly required by law, Jackson Blake stared at the files, doing the frantic mental math of a selfish man realizing his greed has finally trapped him in a corner. He snarled viciously that Evelyn had absolutely no right to invade his company and destroy the corporate empire he had spent over 20 years building, blaming a bitter driver and some wealthy woman's personal grudge. He bellowed this loud enough so that it was clearly meant to intimidate everyone there, not just Evelyn. Evelyn responded with the quiet, unshakable dignity of the truly righteous. She had every right because she owned the company now and would expose its dark secrets. She was placing him on suspension, effective immediately, pending a full federal compliance audit, a report that would be handed directly to state and federal authorities. Then she calmly ordered security to escort Mr. Blake out. Jackson leapt to his feet, slamming his chair backward. He glared across the room at the empty chair where Mason Carter was supposed to sit, swearing that the driver would regret ever crossing his path. 2 security guards grabbed his arms and marched him out. The room fell dead silent. You and I know that real power needs no noise. Evelyn simply nodded at Charlotte. At 11:15 that morning, Mason Carter received a call from an unknown company number. He was sitting silently at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. With Ella at school, his small home felt heavy and silent. Calculating how to feed his child without any income before their lives spiraled out of control. He answered with the weary sigh of a decent man who expects nothing from a harsh world. A gentle voice introduced herself as Charlotte Reed, telling him to come back to the company headquarters as soon as possible to discuss his employment status. Mason warily asked if this was another cruel trick to withhold his hard-earned wages. Charlotte gently assured him it was not. Her quiet sincerity carried a warmth that made him trust her completely. He promised to be there within the hour. He put on his best clothes, a proud habit maintained through years of quiet, invisible hardship. A self-respect that had nothing to do with vanity, but had everything to do with integrity, the quiet dignity of a man who does right when no one is looking. Unseen Grace was waiting. He drove down and parked. Let's look at Mason. He just stepped back into a building he never expected to enter again. The lobby felt completely different from yesterday when they fired him, though he couldn't explain why. Then, the truth hit him. Every single person was staring. None of them showed that awkward distance coworkers usually use to ignore someone who just got let go. Some actually looked relieved. A colleague gently guided him toward the main conference room. A quiet woman in her early 40s stood right in the middle of the room. She stood completely calm, radiating a sharp, watchful intelligence. He had seen that look before in people who survive something terrible and carry that weight forever. He absolutely recognized her face. But then she was just a stranger needing help. Under the harsh orange glow of a burning wrecked car on a dark mountain cliff, he remembered her pale, unconscious face and her hair soaked heavy with rain. It took his brain 2 full seconds to connect that tragic memory with this powerful woman. He froze in his tracks. Evelyn Grant looked at him and spoke his name like an absolute fact. Then she simply said, "Thank you, not," with the frantic, overwhelmed, tearful drama people use to perform gratitude for an audience, but rather with a deep, direct, heavy sincerity of a woman who weighed her quiet words carefully and meant every single syllable. She admitted she was alive solely because of his selfless action, and she knew saving a total stranger had cost him his job, and she intended to make things right today. But first there was a quiet truth she needed him to hear. She had found and read his ignored safety complaint from 8 months ago. She tracked down every buried document showing how management had swept it away. She recognized his quiet courage, filing that safety report and standing behind it. Refusing to stay silent about dangerous trucks proved exactly what kind of man he truly was. It came from the same selfless heart. The man fighting for safety in private and the hero pulling a stranger from a wreck were identical. Such character is rare. Mason stood quietly in that conference room with 20 people staring and insisted he had only done what any decent person would naturally do. He spoke with zero false modesty. He meant it literally. Evelyn gently noted that was exactly the problem. Most people do nothing when doing the right thing demands a heavy personal cost. We both know true kindness doesn't need an audience. It just saves whoever is in danger. Mason stared quietly at the floor for a moment before meeting her gaze. He simply told her he was glad she survived. Mason wouldn't discover the truth until days later, when Evelyn's team dug deeply into the company's logistics records. They exposed the greedy, rotten reality of what Jackson Blake built over 2 decades. This wasn't some minor case of cutting corners because money got tight. It was a cold, systematic practice. The neglected maintenance was chronic. Heavy delivery trucks routinely ran miles past their legal safety limits. With a fully corrupt supervisor, ordered to forge inspections and file completely fake safety paperwork, claiming strict federal compliance, using records that were entirely fictional. Let's look at what happens in the dark. Strangers were forced to drive past their breaking point. Managers quietly doctored the driving logs to make everything look perfectly safe. But when good, honest people spoke up about the real dangers, or simply did the right thing and refused to put a heavy, broken truck out on the road, the company's response showed their cold, cruel nature. A harsh write-up for trying to keep people safe. Another threat next, then fired on the spot for standing firm. Behind closed doors, they stole their final paychecks to keep others quiet. Look at Roy Tanner. He was just a guy trying to keep strangers safe on Route 11. He stepped up anyway, telling the investigators the absolute truth. His bosses had lied, claiming the truck was safe. Instead, they punished him with the worst, longest routes. He finally walked away, realizing that trying to protect innocent people only brought him endless grief and quiet suffering. Kindness is contagious. 2 more drivers stepped up to help after Jackson's suspension. One had barely survived a terrible wreck 17 months ago, a crash he always believed was caused by a broken part he reported weeks before. When investigators checked the secret files, they found he was right. The company had blamed him to cover up their own deadly neglect. Soon Evelyn's legal team filed complaints against the owners, sending evidence straight to state regulators and the federal safety officials. They didn't just steal Mason's hard-earned money, but 6 other working stiffs secretly robbed of their pay under similarly cruel pretexts. Evelyn stepped in without hesitation, ensuring every stranger got their money with interest. As for Jackson, justice came. He got a lawyer and shut his mouth. This greedy boss probably had big plans for his 51st year. But it sure didn't look like this. The pride that let him risk innocent lives for decades fell apart in days, leaving him in a cold, quiet room to face what he'd done. Then Evelyn offered Mason a massive promotion, running the whole safety department. He sat so quiet, she finally asked if she had offended him. No, he replied, only wondering if he could truly do the job right. She did not want some corporate suit with a fancy college degree. She needed someone who knew the real, quiet struggles of everyday drivers. The aching bones, the constant money worries. The weight of raising kids on tight wages while still choosing to do what is right, even when the bosses turned a blind eye to save a dollar. She needed a good soul whose quiet decency would finally guide how they treated people. Ever humble, Mason worried his old crew would think it was just favoritism, believing he only got the job because he knew the right people. Evelyn smiled, knowing his pure heart would prove itself to everyone on the job. We both know that when you serve others with a pure heart, nobody calls it favoritism. Mason just smiled and said he had one condition before starting: every single worker with stolen wages. He demanded full restitution before signing a single document. Evelyn quietly confirmed it was handled. Mason nodded, finally accepting the job. You and I know how true change begins, it whispers quietly through a workplace, spreading among workers watching silently from the shadows, afraid to admit they still hoped. Two veteran drivers on the verge of quitting chose to stay. A veteran dispatcher named Linda. She spent 11 years there, watching honest mechanics get pushed out just for speaking the truth. She silently placed a small plant on his desk that morning, without saying a word. He kept that little plant. Charlotte was the one who urged Evelyn to visit his apartment, not for some cold corporate reason. She felt the little girl deserved a real thank you, and Evelyn knew she was right. That Saturday, Evelyn arrived carrying a cake from the finest bakery in the valley. Crisp white frosting, pink letters, and Ella's name written perfectly. She walked past the broken elevator to the third floor, paused, and finally knocked. Little Ella opened the door. 8 years old, looking so small for her age. She had her father's guarded eyes, wearing a clean, gently washed yellow sweater. She studied Evelyn, with the careful gaze of a child who learned to judge character early. Looking from the cake to Evelyn's face, she innocently asked if it was her birthday too. Evelyn softly told her no. She apologized for missing the real birthday, offering the treat to make things right. Ella weighed this quietly. She then asked if Evelyn was the stranger her dad saved from the burning car. Evelyn nodded yes. Ella was glad she survived, admitted she had worried about her injured hand, and invited her inside. Mason stepped into the kitchen doorway, wiping his hands on a towel, looking completely caught off guard by this unannounced visit. Evelyn promised she wouldn't stay long. He kindly offered her a seat and started brewing some coffee. They sat around the very kitchen table where Ella had waited alone that night, where a father silently crunched numbers for medicine, while a solitary birthday candle burned to nothing. And they just talked. Ella sat between them, eating her cake with the serious focus only a child can muster. Mid-bite, she casually asked Evelyn if her job was really that important. Evelyn softly said yes. Ella smiled, saying that was lucky, since her dad risked his own job to save a stranger. Don't give people a hard time, Mason gently scolded. I'm not, Ella shrugged, I'm just saying. Staring across that cramped table, Evelyn saw a quiet dignity she desperately wanted to remember forever. It was never about the mechanics of the rescue. You and I know it wasn't about the corporate drama, it was something far simpler. She had built an empire from a comfortable position of absolute power and privilege. Wealth, status, and all the compounding advantages of early success. For years, she believed her vast wealth was a direct reflection of her values. But Mason lived those values in the dark, risking his life for a complete stranger. A dark mountain road, heavy rain, 1047, a perfect stranger trapped in the shadows. He had his own quiet struggles, a little daughter and a job on the brink. She survived because of his blind courage, spending years reflecting on that beautiful, nameless kindness. That spring, the logistics company quietly received a brand new name. The fresh wooden sign read Grant Carter Transportation. No flashy press releases, no loud announcements, just quiet gratitude. The new name simply appeared on the building, the trucks, and official letterheads. Every employee felt the quiet shift in values, no explanations were ever needed. They initiated a deep safety sweep, making sure every truck met the highest standards. Their maintenance protocols were completely overhauled from scratch, ensuring every detail was fully honest and transparent. Independent partners logged each inspection, keeping the books open for any driver to see. Wages were restructured fairly, honoring their true hours and the harsh realities of the road. The old dishonest habit of altering driver logs was eliminated entirely by a tracking system Mason designed, built directly on real feedback from the drivers. He knew their daily struggles firsthand. He understood precisely what needed to be made right. They created a crisis fund for staff facing sudden emergencies, like medical bills or family struggles. The quiet, heavy burdens that can destroy a vulnerable family overnight. Mason stepped up to serve on the fund's review board, doing this selfless work late on Wednesdays, after his daughter went to sleep. He was far from a perfect leader, but he learned his new duties with the same quiet, methodical patience he once used to repair broken-down truck engines, dismantling tough problems and humbly asking for help whenever he lacked the answers. Showing complete, raw honesty about the things he still had to learn. Whenever he made mistakes, he took responsibility. That sort of quiet integrity is rare, quickly earning deep respect from everyone. You and I know trust is earned. Skeptical drivers came around because he was no dramatic, flashy hero. He simply faced real issues head-on, refusing to bury difficult truths in the dark. Every morning he made sure to drive his daughter to school. Not because he had to. The school bus stopped right outside their apartment building. It was a conscious choice, a daily decision to be fully present for her quiet, peaceful moments, and not just during emergencies. They talked in the front seat about whatever wandered into Ella's mind. From simple school science projects to deep, honest questions about the adults she saw each day. He always gave her the absolute truth, bringing a deep, lasting peace to her mind. On the dashboard sat that cherished photo of Ella on her first day of kindergarten, smiling warmly at the camera. The sweet gap between her front teeth was long gone now. Yet she still smiled with that very same joyful, radiant spark. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as he drove back from school drop-off, Mason took the scenic mountain route back, simply enjoying the breathtaking canyon light and a brief moment of quiet peace. He drove past the exact spot in the guardrail, fully repaired since that fateful stormy night. You could clearly see where the fresh steel connected with the old, rusted metal. Two different shades of silver. He gently tapped the brakes, slowing to a crawl. At dinner, Ella asked what he saw out there. Because you and I know, blind kindness always finds its way back. Because she caught that soft, thoughtful look when he slowed. He asked how she even knew. She said he always made that face when wrestling with big questions. Over the years, she had simply learned to recognize it. He admitted he was just reflecting on life choices. How the most selfless, life-altering decisions rarely feel like massive choices at the time. They just look like the next right step directly in front of you. Ella quietly digested that thought, both literally and figuratively. She asked if he knew, scrambling down that hill, that saving a total stranger would lead to all of this. Mason shook his head. True compassion never stops to calculate the outcome. A helpless stranger was trapped inside a wrecked car with a broken fuel tank. The car was leaking gas. To a kind heart, nothing else mattered. You and I might wonder what she asked next. If he knew it would cost his job, would he still have done it? Mason sat in silence. He would still choose the exact same path. He explained that when someone needs help, the only real answer is already knowing what you must do, long before the question is even finished. Ella nodded, as if this confirmed a beautiful truth she was learning. Later that night, she asked if Evelyn would come to her next birthday party. Mason admitted he wasn't sure. Ella smiled, saying it would be nice before heading off to do homework. Mason sat alone at the kitchen table in the deep quiet apartment, reflecting on the 6 months since he saved that stranger on a dark mountain road, thinking about how one blind act of mercy triggers a chain of events, about how choosing to be honest about a faulty brake line and risking everything for a stranger in a burning wreck were born from the exact same selfless heart. His mind drifted to Evelyn, the stranger who stepped in, and out of his life with absolute respect, never once demanding a single thing. He realized they were now talking every couple of weeks about the business, and those calls were suddenly stretching much longer than required. He did not even try to analyze what it meant. He simply trusted that good deeds find their own timeline. Outside, the mountains rose dark against a sky holding the very last fading light of day. Down below, the city glowed in a slow, steady spread of amber and white. Somewhere down in that valley, a heavy freight truck was driving along the highway, driven by someone who logged his hours honestly and was steering a vehicle that had safely passed its inspection that very morning, while another driver headed home safely. You and I know none of this was true a year ago, but it was true now. He realized what real impact meant, not through one grand heroic gesture, but through a quiet accumulation of small, honest decisions to help a stranger, especially when looking the other way would have been so much easier. He remembered the old photo on his dashboard, and the tiny burned-down birthday candle. Then his daughter sweetly saying her mother would have been incredibly proud. He smiled, knowing in his heart it was probably true. The rugged mountains loomed dark, and the city shone bright. Tomorrow Ella had a big school project she had not even started yet. He had an early audit meeting, Kindness rewards the soul, and tonight there was cake in the fridge. Every stranger carries the quiet, unseen weight of an ordinary life. A life worth saving even with nobody watching.